The sound of the slap was so sharp it cut through the clink of silverware and the low murmur of conversation. It came without warning, a sudden crack that froze every person at the long Thanksgiving table. Rachel's head snapped to the side, her hair falling forward to hide the red mark spreading across her cheek. She blinked quickly, as if trying to decide whether to cry or hold it in. No one moved. Some stared wide-eyed, others dropped their gaze, and a few wore faint, satisfied smirks. Ethan Callahan, her husband, stood over her with one hand still raised, his chest rising and falling with the rush of anger. His voice was low, each word laced with contempt. "Do not ever embarrass me like that again." His family sat silently, as if the moment were an awkward pause in a conversation rather than an act of violence. At the far end of the table, I sat very still. My name is Colonel Diane Mercer, 60 years old, retired after 35 years in the U.S. Army. I have seen men lose control under enemy fire, seen fear take over even the toughest soldiers. But what I saw in Ethan's face was not the chaos of combat. It was calculated dominance, the kind that grows in the shadows of a home and feeds on silence. Rachel is my only daughter. I raised her to be kind, to stand on her own, to know her worth. Yet here she was, shrinking under the hand of a man who swore to love and protect her. And here I was, watching. Not because I could not act, but because for the past 2 months I had been preparing for this moment. The mistake Ethan had just made was not in losing his temper. It was in forgetting that his mother-in-law had commanded a battalion, had never once backed down when her family was threatened, and had been gathering evidence of his abuse piece by piece. This was the night I would use it. This was the night he would learn what it meant to pick the wrong enemy. Rachel Mercer Callahan was 34 years old, a former art teacher who used to fill her small home with color and music. She once spent hours painting in the sunlight of her kitchen, laughing easily and talking about her students. But over the last 2 years I had watched that brightness dim. The kitchen was quieter now, her laughter rare, her eyes shadowed. At first I told myself it was stress, maybe the pressure of marriage, bills, and everyday life. But the signs became too specific, too telling. A faint bruise along her jaw, brushed away with a quick eye bumped into a cabinet. The way her shoulders stiffened when Ethan's voice rose in another room. How she seemed to always stand slightly behind him, as if to avoid being noticed. When I asked, she smiled tightly. "I'm fine, Mom," but her hands trembled when she poured tea, and she never met my eyes for long. I had led soldiers through ambushes, seen them hide their injuries to keep moving forward. I recognized that same instinct in my daughter, the need to hide the pain so no one could use it against her. At family dinners, Ethan's control was subtle. A hand pressing firmly on her shoulder if she spoke too long. A look that shut her down mid-sentence. In public, he wrapped his arm around her in a way that looked affectionate but pinned her in place. It reminded me of something I used to teach my soldiers. The most dangerous enemy isn't the one who charges at you, it's the one who waits, watches, and strikes when you're most vulnerable. I began to see Ethan that way. He was deliberate. Every comment, every gesture was part of a strategy to make Rachel smaller, quieter, easier to control. And the rest of his family seemed to play their parts without hesitation. His mother, Linda Callahan, delivered her insults with a sugary smile. His sister Danielle would laugh at Rachel's expense, and his brother-in-law would pile on. It was a performance, a twisted family play, where Rachel was cast as the undeserving outsider, and Ethan was the hero who tolerated her flaws. I knew confronting them head-on wouldn't work. I had been in situations where one wrong move could escalate everything beyond control. I needed facts, proof, and timing. I remembered a fellow officer once telling me, "Evidence is the quiet weapon. It doesn't shout, it strikes when you decide." That stayed with me. So I started watching more closely. Every time I visited, I paid attention to the bruises, the way Rachel avoided certain topics, and how Ethan's voice would drop into a quiet, dangerous tone when she disagreed. It wasn't paranoia, it was pattern recognition, and I knew the next step would be to document those patterns until there was no room for denial. Because if I learned anything in the military, it's that winning a battle often comes down to preparation, and I was preparing for the biggest one of my life. The turning point came on a rainy Tuesday evening when I stopped by Rachel's house unannounced. I was carrying a casserole, an excuse to check in. Through the front window, I saw her in the kitchen, standing perfectly still while Ethan loomed over her. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read his body language, shoulders squared, hands gesturing sharply, face inches from hers. Then I saw her flinch. By the time she opened the door for me, her smile was plastered on like a mask. "Ethan was gone upstairs," she said, but I noticed a faint red mark on her forearm. My stomach tightened. I'd seen that kind of mark before, from fingers gripping too hard. That night, I made my decision. Feelings wouldn't win this fight. Facts would. And in my years of service, I'd learned how to gather facts so they couldn't be disputed. The next day, I went to a small security store run by a retired Marine I knew. I bought 3 covert cameras, one disguised as a picture frame, one as a smoke detector, and one small enough to fit in the corner of a bookshelf. I also purchased an audio recorder the size of a thumb drive. All of it was motion-activated, date-stamped, and easy to hide. On my next visit, I brought Rachel some housewarming gifts: a new picture frame for the mantel, a decorative smoke detector for the hallway, and a small book for the living room shelf. She didn't question it, she had no reason to. For the next 6 weeks I collected footage: Ethan yelling over something trivial, a dinner served 10 minutes late. Ethan shoving past Rachel in the hallway, his shoulder slamming into hers. Ethan gripping her wrist until she pulled away in pain. Each file was saved twice, once on a secure hard drive in my home, and once on encrypted cloud storage. I didn't tell Rachel. Not yet. Survivors sometimes defend their abusers until they feel truly safe, and I needed her to have undeniable proof when the time came. Every soldier knows that intelligence gathering is slow work. You observe, you record, you wait, and when the right moment comes, you use every piece of it to achieve your objective. In this case, my objective was simple: remove my daughter from danger and make sure Ethan Callahan never had the power to hurt her again. By mid-November, my evidence was solid. I had hours of video and audio, each piece painting a clear picture of who Ethan really was behind closed doors. But evidence alone wouldn't end this, not in a way that would leave no room for him to twist the story. I needed the confrontation to happen in a place where his family could see the truth for themselves. The invitation came from Ethan himself. He called one afternoon, his tone dripping with forced politeness, to ask if I'd join them for Thanksgiving dinner. "Rachel would love to have you here," he said, though I could hear the control in his voice. It wasn't a request, it was a performance. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I contacted an old friend from my Army days, Captain Laura Jennings, now working in the military legal system. I told her everything. She didn't hesitate. "I'll be there," she said, "and I'll bring the paperwork we need, ready to execute." That meant a protective order could be issued on the spot if necessary. In the days leading up to Thanksgiving, Rachel's voice over the phone was tight, and she spoke in short sentences. When I asked if she was okay, she brushed it off. "Just busy," she said, but I knew better. I could hear the strain in her breathing. The morning of Thanksgiving, I arrived early, casserole in hand. Rachel's hands were cold when she greeted me, her eyes darting toward the dining room, where Ethan was arranging place settings. He barely acknowledged me, just gave a curt nod. I scanned the room out of habit, noting the positions of every chair, the line of sight from the table to the living room, the best place to stand if I needed to take control. Years in uniform had trained me to assess a room within seconds, and tonight, that training might make all the difference. By the time the rest of Ethan's family arrived, the tension was thick enough to taste. They laughed loudly, exchanged pleasantries, and settled in for what they thought would be another evening of subtle cruelty toward Rachel. They had no idea the battlefield they were stepping onto. From the moment the first course was served, the pattern began. Ethan's mother, Linda, leaned across the table with a sugary smile. "Rachel, dear, you really should think about doing something with your hair. Ethan works so hard, he deserves a wife who takes care of herself." A ripple of quiet laughter moved around the table. Ethan chuckled, adding, "I keep telling her that, Mom." I watched Rachel's face tighten as she forced a polite smile. My jaw clenched, but I stayed silent. This wasn't the time. Not yet. His sister Danielle picked up where their mother left off. "Remember when you tried that painting class, Rachel? You barely lasted 2 weeks. Guess some hobbies aren't for everyone." More laughter. Ethan grinned, clearly enjoying the spectacle. I caught Captain Laura's eye from across the table. She gave the faintest nod. She was ready. The main course arrived, and the conversation turned to careers. Ethan's brother-in-law, Mark, puffed up in his seat. "Daniel just got promoted to regional manager. You know, it's nice having a wife who's ambitious." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Linda stabbed her fork into her turkey. "Ambition is important, Some women just settle. Rachel set her fork down. Ambition is important, she said softly, but so is respect. It was a quiet statement, but it cut through the noise. The laughter stopped. Ethan's head turned toward her, slow and deliberate. Then, in one sharp motion, he stood and brought his hand across her face. The sound was like a gunshot. Rachel's head snapped to the side, hair falling across her cheek. For a moment the room froze, no one breathing, no one moving. I rose from my chair, my hands steady. "Ethan," I said evenly, "sit down." He turned toward me, his eyes flashing. "This is between me and my wife." "No," I said, stepping closer. "This is between you and the evidence I've been collecting for the past 2 months." I pulled my phone from my pocket and tapped the screen. The dining room filled with the sound of Ethan's voice from a recording, harsh, threatening, unmistakable. On the screen, a video showed him shoving Rachel against a wall, his face twisted in anger. Linda gasped. Danielle's fork slipped from her hand. I looked directly at Ethan. That's one of 27 videos, all of them backed up, all of them already in the hands of law enforcement. Ethan's face paled. "You can't." "I can," I interrupted. "And I have. Tonight, in front of your entire family, you've just given us the final piece we needed." Captain Laura stood, pulling a folded document from her bag. "Ethan Callahan, this is an emergency protective order. You are to vacate these premises immediately and have no contact with Rachel Mercer Callahan." The silence was heavy, broken only by Ethan's ragged breathing. For the first time since I'd met him, he had nothing to say. Ethan's chair scraped loudly against the floor as he stepped back, eyes darting from me to Captain Laura, then to the shocked faces around the table. "This is ridiculous," he sputtered. "You can't just throw me out of my own house." Laura's voice was calm but firm. "This house is jointly owned, but given the documented evidence of domestic abuse, the court has granted Rachel temporary exclusive occupancy. You'll have an opportunity to contest it in legal proceedings, but for now, you must leave." Linda found her voice. "Diane, surely we can handle this privately. No need to involve strangers." I turned toward her, meeting her gaze head-on. "Privately is what allowed this to happen. Privately is what kept my daughter in harm's way. And frankly, Linda, you are no stranger to this. You sat here while your son belittled her. You joined in. That makes you part of it." Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Danielle stared down at her plate, unable to look at anyone. Ethan jabbed a finger in my direction. "This is entrapment. You've been spying on me." I didn't flinch. Spying? No. Protecting? Absolutely. The difference is that everything I recorded is legal and admissible, and every second of it shows you for what you are. His voice rose, desperate now. "You've been plotting this. You came here tonight to humiliate me." I stepped closer, lowering my voice just enough for the room to lean in. "I came here to end this. Humiliation is just the byproduct of the truth." Laura unfolded the second document. "Mr. Callahan, you're also under a temporary no-contact order. That means no calls, no texts, no messages through third parties. If you violate it, you'll be arrested immediately." Rachel's breathing was shaky, but she sat straighter in her chair. She glanced at me, and for the first time in months, I saw a flicker of relief in her eyes. Mark cleared his throat. "Ethan, maybe you should just go." Ethan spun on him. "You too? You're siding with them." Mark looked away. "I'm siding with not being part of this mess." The room shifted. The air felt different. The dominance Ethan once carried like armor was crumbling in real time. I gave him one last, unblinking look. "You can walk out on your own or you can be escorted. Choose wisely." His jaw tightened, but he knew the fight was over. Without another word, he grabbed his coat from the back of his chair and strode to the door. The slam echoed down the hallway. I turned to Rachel, my voice softening. "It's over. You're safe now." But in my mind, I knew this was only the beginning. Because safety isn't just about removing the threat, it's about rebuilding the person who's been living in fear. The night Ethan was forced to leave, Rachel came home with me. She packed a single overnight bag, moving slowly as though afraid he might suddenly reappear in the doorway. I carried the rest. Every slam of a dresser drawer felt like the release of months of held-in air. For the first few days, Rachel barely spoke. She moved from the bedroom to the kitchen and back again, as if unsure what to do without waiting for someone's permission. I didn't press her. In the army, I'd learned that after a firefight, soldiers need time to let their minds catch up with their bodies. Survivors of domestic battles are no different. Within a week, Captain Laura confirmed that the protective order had been extended, giving Rachel sole use of the house until the divorce was finalized. Ethan had been served with court dates on charges of domestic assault and harassment. His bail conditions kept him several miles away. The legal process moved faster than I expected. Our evidence was airtight, and Ethan's own actions at Thanksgiving had given us live witnesses. In court, his lawyer tried to spin the recordings as misunderstandings and marital disagreements, but the judge wasn't buying it. Ethan was convicted on 2 misdemeanor counts and 1 felony count for aggravated assault. He was sentenced to a combination of probation, mandatory counseling, and a 5-year no-contact order. Rachel sold the house. She said it didn't feel like home anymore, just a building full of echoes she didn't want to hear again. With the settlement and her share of the proceeds, she rented a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood. She started teaching again, picking up part-time work at a local art studio. Slowly, the light came back into her eyes. One evening, as we sat together over coffee in her new kitchen, she said, "I keep thinking about that night, Mom. If you hadn't been there." I reached across the table, covering her hand with mine. "Rachel, I was always going to be there. The only difference that night was that I made sure everyone saw the truth at the same time." She smiled then, a real smile. And in that moment, I knew the mission had been worth every second. Looking back, I know some people will ask why I waited, why I didn't step in the first time I saw a bruise or heard the edge in Ethan's voice. The truth is, I've led enough missions to understand that timing is everything. Charging in too soon can cost you the battle, and in this case, the battle was for my daughter's freedom, her safety, and her future. Ethan lost more than his marriage. He lost the ability to control her, to define her worth, to shrink her spirit. Rachel found her voice again, piece by piece, and I got to see my daughter stand on her own, not as a victim, but as a survivor. What I learned from my years in uniform is that battles are rarely won by strength alone. They're won by preparation, strategy, and the unwavering belief in the mission. My mission that night was clear: protect my daughter, and make sure the person hurting her faced real consequences. To anyone watching this who sees the signs in someone they love, believe them, watch closely, gather the truth, and when the moment comes, stand beside them with everything you have. Because real protection isn't just about shielding someone from harm, it's about dismantling the source of the harm so it can't rise again. If you found value in this story, share it. Someone out there might need the reminder that they are not alone, that there's a way out, and that sometimes the quiet, patient kind of revenge is the one that changes everything.